So getting started, we're going to do a little bit of an overview here about the current state of trade in Washington right now and throughout the world. This webinar is really meant to focus on what's known as Section 301, having to do with the import tariffs that are coming from products from China. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about how you can seek some exclusions and hopefully to find some relief from this tariff process. And then, as I mentioned, I'll be able to answer any questions you have at the end. So giving a little bit of a tariff overview, and if you joined us for the first webinar, you've definitely seen this, but the industry is continuing to be hit from multiple angles on the tariff front, whether it has to do with tariffs being placed on Chinese aluminum sheet, to over 300 now products on what's called the Section 301 list. NAFTA continues to hang in the balance as those negotiations are definitely being wrapped up into the overall trade climate. We see worldwide prices changing on steel and aluminum with the Section 232 tariffs that were announced earlier this year. And that what I know a lot of you are facing and has been a real hard hit is the ongoing retaliation by our key trading partners that is closing off markets and making it much more difficult to sell U.S. product abroad. It's good really to continue to think about this in three buckets. Tariffs are impacting raw materials of boats. I mentioned Section 232, that's the worldwide tariff on both steel and aluminum, 10% on aluminum, 25% on steel worldwide. While there are some countries that have been exempt for it, our key trading allies are not. And this has also caused increased prices in the domestic market. What I'm hearing from many of you is year to date, it can be upwards of 30% cost on that raw material, on the aluminum raw material. When you look at the component parts bucket, that's what we'll be really digging into on this webinar, but these are the Section 301 tariffs that there's been several lists, more things keep on are being added to this list, but it's including everything from inflatables to engines to propellers to navigation to a lot of chemicals and things like fiberglass, which are so important to our industry. There are different tariff rates for each of the tariff schedules, but we're seeing a range between 10 and 25%. And there is some ongoing rhetoric that more things could be added to this list and it might not be over. Then that third bucket is really where we see exports being impacted, and that's because of the inability of our key trading partners in the U.S. to come to an agreement on Section 232. So there's a little bit of interrelatedness to this all, but not having an exemption from the worldwide tariff has resulted in Canada putting a 10% tariff on all boats, Europe putting 25%, and Mexico putting 15%. That's about 70% of all boat exports are going to one of those three markets. And so we know we're hearing from you that this is a significant hit to your overall sales. Not only is the boating industry being squeezed from one end with higher costs, it's just becoming more costly to build the product, but you're having less demand overseas as some of these export markets are being closed off. At the end of the day, a tariff is a tax, and they're a tax on goods that are being imported from overseas. And we're getting hit from these taxes on all angles, whether it's the component parts, your raw materials, or you're facing a tax that's making your product less profitable overseas with global competitors. We know that these taxes have hit the industry historically very hard. I have heard from many of you that you're already seeing significant sales losses as a result of these taxes, and so that's why we continue to focus on this, monitoring the situation. We are really advocating from all angles up on Capitol Hill, trying to get our voice out in the media, getting your voice out in the media, and meeting with lawmakers and decision makers to tell them the impact, and this is not the direction that we need to be going in. So that kind of gives you a brief overview of the current state of play. I'm happy to answer any questions on some of the other tariffs at the end, but wanted to give you a little bit more detail about Section 301 because there's an avenue for relief here that I think might be of interest to many of you. I mentioned Section 301. That's kind of the shorthand that everybody talks about right now. But this has to do with the Trade Act of 1974, where the USTR, United States Trade Representative, can investigate unfair trade practices. This is being applied currently to China. So when we're talking about 301, it's only imported products from China. The administration has been very clear that they feel that China is undergoing unfair trade practices. They have been infringing on intellectual property. I think there's pretty, widespread agreement among the business community that nobody doubts that that's not happening. I mean, we definitely see some of their trade practices as being unfair. We understand that the IP infringements are happening all over the place. But the back and forth tariff war, if you will, where, continually adding new products on a tariff schedule has really escalated this problem, and it isn't really going after the target of unfair trade practices or IP infringement specifically. So this slide gives you really a little bit of the history of everything. As you can see, it's been a very busy spring and summer, but I think it kind of lays a good perspective for you on the different lists and what's been happening. So let's go back to April. In April, that's when President Trump proposed that he was a 25% tariff on $50 billion worth of Chinese imports. We immediately took notice of that because many marine products such as engines, component parts, antennas, parts used for navigation were on that list. NMMA submitted comments. I went and testified in front of the USTR. We have several members that also participated in that process. And at that point, we were asking for marine products to be removed before a finalized list was set. Unfortunately, in June, the list was finalized, and none of the products we asked to be removed were. And so that started a 25% tariff as of July 6th that's being, now collected on that $34 billion worth of products. So some products were removed from that initial list, but unfortunately the marine products were not. Then later on in June, the president proposed another set of tariffs on an additional $14 billion of goods. I'll explain it in a little bit more detail later, but so you have the first list that was announced in April, finalized in June. Now you have a second list that came out in June on $14 billion of products. That's undergoing review as we speak. People are testifying and submitting comments, so it has not yet been finalized. But as this is all happening, in July, the president proposed a third list of tariffs on Chinese products, this one totaling $200 billion worth of goods. We saw many marine products added to that list too. So we are in a little bit of an open comment period, particularly for the third list, and then some options that you have on that first list, where companies and associations can seek product exclusion, can continue to offer their thoughts and comments on the third list before it's finalized, and I'll walk you through some of those steps in more detail. But as I said, this kind of gives you a timeline of April to today, and hopefully helps you understand the three different lists that we're talking about. So let's look at list one. This has been in effect since July 6th. It's a 25% tariff on $34 billion in goods. I've put a few of the HTS codes that are impacted here, but as you can see, it ranges from everything from outboard motors, radar and navigation, propellers, a lot of the electronics that are used in marine equipment and navigation, fish finders, that's all on this list. So if you are bringing in a component product from China, it's now subject to a 25% tariff. We'll be putting this whole presentation up on the website. So as you see, there's some links that you can click and find the full list of products that are here. This is just a highlighted section of that first tariff schedule, which is already in effect. So then you look at list 2. This is still in the proposal phase. That's, as I mentioned, there are ongoing comments right now, but it is a 25% tariff on another $16 billion worth of goods. For the marine industry, we've noticed that some of the electric motors and floating docks are on this list. Again, we'll include the link so you can see the full tariff schedule. But there's no, and just to clarify, the lists are separate, so it's not a compounding tariff on this front. But there's marine products on the first one, on the second one, and on the third one, but there's no overlap in those same products. And then here you have list 3, which is the most recent list that was proposed. It's a 10% tariff, but on a far broader scope of products out there, $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. This list includes all marine vessels, so boats of every size, from your kayaks and canoes and your inflatables all the way up to some of your larger yachts. There are some marine parts on there, as well as trailer tires, and fiberglass is on this list. Now, this list is not final, so there's an opportunity for NMMA, which we plan to do, but for you all and as an industry to participate in the public comment process. So, the more we can put our voices out and ask for specific codes to be removed from the list, the better chance we're going to have of making a case in front of the administration. There's a couple key dates here. You'll see July 27th. If you are interested in testifying, which if your products are being impacted, I strongly suggest you come here and testify, and we'll work with you and help you draft your comments and walk you through the process. But if you're interested in doing it, you have to request to testify before this Friday. Once you request to testify, there's an opportunity to also, if you are unable to testify, there's an opportunity to also submit written comments. You'll see there that's August 17th. And then the actual hearings will be between August 20th and 23rd here in Washington. If you are able to come, there's also an opportunity to put some rebuttal comments. So, it's a very confusing process, and I know we're trying to keep all the lists straight in our head, and I can only imagine how difficult it is for you. But this is the third list. It's not yet finalized. The only thing that has been finalized is that first list. But again, you can see all the HTS codes, and we'll make sure to provide you that full link. So, I've been getting a couple questions. I'll answer them now, but like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at the end as well. Who pays the tariffs? It's the importer of record. I know on some other things, people are looking at different options, but if you are bringing in a product from China before that product is going to be released, the tariff has to be paid. Now, many of you might not be buying these products directly from China, but as your distributors are facing higher prices because of the tariffs, we are expecting, and you probably have already seen, if those products were on the first list and the tariff is already being impacted, higher prices. Why are boats being targeted? It's a very politically calculated move. With the 301 list as it is, it's really was supposed to be targeted towards intellectual property and unfair practices. The thought was really to go after that high-tech industry and the China 2020-25 campaign. But now there were 3 lists and, thousands of products and $250 billion worth of imported value. It definitely has a much broader stroke, and we just unfortunately happen to be within that target range. When do the tariffs end? It's up to the president. A lot of the discussion here in Washington is that this is a negotiation tactic by the administration, and that China is definitely seeing an impact to their economy as a result of this, and it may bring everybody to the table and come together for some sort of agreement. Here at NMMA, I mentioned it before, but it's really important to reiterate is, nobody's doubting that there are unfair trade practices with China. Nobody's doubting that there are intellectual property infringements that are happening on U.S. products. But our concern is this back and forth tariff fight, because while the U.S. has 3 lists, China's been putting out their own lists too and going after many U.S. products. It's just not getting to the root of the problem. And so if we really want these tariffs to end, if we want to go after the key issues, having a negotiated trade agreement with China is going to be the best bet to make that happen. Will other products be added? You know, the president has made indications that he's willing to put every Chinese import on a tariff list and make it the whole $500 billion in imported value. We hope it doesn't escalate to that, but you know, that definitely remains a possibility. So how can you help, and how can you be involved for the betterment of your company and the industry? The first option is if your product is on the first tariff list, so the one that has been finalized, that 25% tariff is already being collected, you have an opportunity from now until October 9th to apply for an exclusion. So basically, you're going to ask the U.S. government that this imported product, component part, whatever it is that applies to your company, your sector, shouldn't face this tariff. Now, that request has to be very specific. You know, they mean business at USTR. They're not looking just to give away loopholes. But if you can identify the particular product, provide supporting data and a clear rationale for why the exclusion is needed, you're going to need to be able to explain whether that product or a comparable product is available from sources inside the U.S. or from sources outside of China. And be able to talk about the imposition of this duties and the economic harm that it's going to have to U.S. interests, U.S. businesses. So it's pretty significant and specific what they're asking for. We expect it to be a pretty high burden for them to offer this exclusion, but you don't know until you try. And, you know, we are here to help you with formulating that request. NMMA plans to also submit our separate requests with the marine products that we see being impacted. But you have from now until October 9th to do so. The good news is if you were to actually get the exclusion, then it would apply retroactively. So you would get back the tariffs already paid. And the exclusion, from our understanding, would only last from the year in which it was published. So the idea is if these tariffs go on in longer segments than a year, then you would have to then reapply on an annual basis. So this is live now. We are happy to walk you through it. But if your product is on that first list, here is a way out through the exclusion process. And this shows you a little bit about how to do that. Again, some of the questions they're going to ask you. We will share, of course, all the links with you so you have that. But this is how you would go online and apply for it directly. Now, the other option is if the product you're concerned about is on the second list or on the third list, it's really important to submit comments to tell USTR why you want that product removed, why it's important to you and your company. Again, think of it in the lens that they're looking at. Can you only get it from China? Why are you sourcing it from China? Are you a wholly U.S.-owned subsidiary that there is no threat of IP infringements? All those arguments are very valid, and they need to hear from us, because if they're not hearing from impacted industries, then they're going to assume that the tariffs are okay and that we want them. As I mentioned, the other big avenue is if your product is on that third list, the $200 billion list, please consider coming up to Washington and testifying at the hearing. But if you want to do it, you have to request to testify by this Friday. If you can't come here and testify, those dates don't work for you in August, you can still submit written comments, and I strongly urge everyone to submit written comments highlighting the impact, specifying the HTS codes that you're concerned about, and you'll see here we can link you directly to that website where you can submit your comments online. We are fighting this from multiple fronts. So we are making sure that the administration hears the marine industry voice, that they understand the impact that these import tariffs are having on the marine industry. But the more you can share your stories with us, the better, because we are going up on Capitol Hill. I'm continuously having meetings with the administration, and it's one thing to say, hey, this is bad for the marine industry. It's a whole other thing to put real businesses, jobs, employees, put that face on it. And so if it doesn't have to be formal, but if you can just shoot me an email and say, hey, Nicole, this is the HTS code that we're being impacted. We're seeing that this is, X amount of dollars, or we're really concerned our prices are going up 50%, any of that detail. I can keep it confidential, but it adds a little bit of light to the story, so that it's not just an association speaking from broad perspectives, but giving a little bit of anecdotes to those key decision makers that if they're going to make a difference, they need to know what's happening back home, back in their home states and in their districts. So let me know, are you facing higher costs? Are you getting order cancellations? Are you facing supply shortages? All those are really helpful details as we build our case, as we submit our comments, and then as we tell the marine industry story here in Washington and throughout the states as well. There's also a really easy way for you to get engaged. We need to continue to put pressure on Congress to check these actions. While we understand that the administration is looking to be tough on our competitors and do great things for American jobs and for American companies, they need to hear that this is not all great for U.S. businesses. And so we have a live campaign through Boating United. The link is here, and we'll be sending that to you directly. But it's super easy. You can do it on your phone. You type in your name and your address, and we have a preloaded letter, and it goes right out to your member of Congress. I encourage you to, when you get the link, fill it out, but also share it. Share it with your employees. Share it with your dealers. The more letters, the more calls, the more social media tweets that we have, the stronger that voice is going to be. And so we really encourage you, if you're looking at a way to connect, if you're looking at a way to tell your story, this is a really easy avenue for you to do so. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Okay, so there are a couple questions, Nicole. The first question is, will tariffs will tariffs apply to used boats or ship sales to or from the U.S. and Europe and Africa?
So if you are sending a boat, whether it's new or used, from the U.S. to Europe, you would have a 25% tariff. There is not a tariff to any African countries right now. The way this is scheduled, it doesn't matter whether it's new or used. It matters whether it falls in one of the HTS codes that is being impacted by Europe. And we will supply that full list. But again, to Europe, new or used, 25% tariff, a 10% tariff to Canada, a 15% tariff to Mexico. But those are the only three countries that we're seeing that tariff on new or used boats.
Okay, the next question, are we going to see a tariff on boats coming into the United States?
So some of you have asked me this, and I understand it's putting U.S. products at an unfair advantage against global competitors. Our position here is that rather than putting a tariff on European boats, let's say, and that's only going to further escalate this war. What we want to do is get boats removed off the list entirely. We want the U.S. and Europe, we want the U.S. and Canada, U.S. and Mexico to come to an agreement, stop the retaliation, full stop. I completely understand that U.S. manufacturers are at an unfair advantage, but that's the story that we need to be telling this administration, that if you're here to help U.S. companies, you're having the exact opposite effect because our global competitors are able to sell their boats at a lot cheaper and not face this tariff. But at this point, we're hoping that this is a short-term game, that we'll be able to come to an agreement, and rather than adding more products to tariff lists and engaging in a back and forth, we can come to an agreement and remove all boats from the list entirely.
Okay, the next question is, are commercial ships excluded, new or used?
I am not aware of commercial ships being on this list. We've been focusing on the recreational side. I do know that everything from canoes and kayaks and inflatables, some of the smaller vessels, but I am not aware of commercial.
Okay, the next question is, an exclusion granted industry-wide to specific product or to a specific company or a specific product?
So it's one thing we've actually been asking clarification for, that if an exclusion, let's say, is given to one company, shouldn't that be applied to the entire HTS code? So if you, for example, apply for an exclusion on inflatables, would everybody get that exclusion that imports inflatable boats under that code? We have not gotten that clarity from USTR, but that is something that we're seeking. Our hope is, and we know other industries are asking for the same, that if they exclude a product, they exclude it for everybody, not company by company. But that has not yet been made clear.
Okay, Switzerland is not an EU company. Are US built boats shipped there excluded from the tariffs?
The retaliation tariffs are only being applied by companies within the European Union, or countries within the European Union. So if it is a country outside of the EU bloc, then it would not apply.
Okay, that is all the questions we have.
Okay, well, my information is here. Please do not hesitate to contact me if you have any follow-up questions. Again, I'm looking for your stories. It's helpful for our team here to do our jobs and fight on your behalf if we can know the impact. We will have this, like I said, this will be live up on the website, so you'll be able to click on the links, go directly to see the full list of products that are being impacted, as well as how to apply for the exclusion. And this will also be recorded, so if there are folks in your company or colleagues that you think would be find this of usefulness, please make sure to share that link, and we'll be sharing that through our social media and Currents as well. But thank you for joining us today, and let's stay in touch, and we'll continue to update you as new developments happen in the trade front.